Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My parents gave my entire inheritance to my sister because she needed it more. I worked hard to build my life without it, but now they're back, asking me for financial help. The problem? I'm done being their backup plan, and I had no problem letting them know. It happened 5 years ago, but I can still remember the day as clearly as if it were yesterday. My parents called me over for what they described as an important family discussion. The tone was serious, but not alarming, so I assumed it would be something mundane, like updating their will or talking about retirement plans. I was completely unprepared for what they were about to tell me. We sat in their cozy living room, the one where so many childhood memories were made. My mom poured tea and handed me a cup with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My dad sat on the edge of his chair, fiddling with his watch, a telltale sign he was nervous. So, my mom began, her voice unnaturally cheerful. Your dad and I have been doing some thinking about the future. We want to make sure everything's in order. She glanced at my dad, who gave a small nod. And we've decided that it's best if Rachel gets the inheritance. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. Wait, what? I asked, setting my tea down. Your sister needs it more, my mom said, her smile faltering. My dad cleared his throat. Look, you're doing great for yourself. You have a good job, your finances are in order, and you're independent. Rachel, on the other hand, is struggling. She's got student loans, credit card debt. She's just in a tough spot. We thought it would be best to help her out. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My inheritance, money they promised would be split equally between me and my sister, wasn't just being adjusted or reduced. It was being handed over entirely. Are you serious? I asked, my voice rising. You're just giving it to her? All of it? My mom winced at my tone, but nodded. We know it's a big ask, but this is about family. Rachel needs it more than you do. And you're strong. My name? You'll figure things out. The audacity of it left me speechless. They hadn't asked for my opinion or input. They'd already made the decision and were presenting it to me like it was some grand act of fairness. To them, it was a no-brainer. To me, it was a betrayal. What about what I need? I finally said, my voice trembling. You think just because I'm doing okay right now, I don't deserve what was promised to me? That I don't deserve your support? Sweetheart, it's not like that, my mom said, reaching out to touch my hand. I pulled away. It's exactly like that, I shot back. You've decided that Rachel's mistakes are more important than my hard work. That's what this is. My dad sighed heavily. It's not about fairness, it's about priorities. Rachel is drowning, and we can't just stand by and watch her fail. You'll understand one day when you have kids of your own. The condescension in his tone made my blood boil. What I understand, I said, standing up, is that you don't think I matter as much as Rachel does. And honestly, that tells me everything I need to know. I left their house that night feeling more hurt than angry. The anger came later, once the reality of what they'd done started to sink in. My parents had always played favorites with Rachel, but this was on another level. They didn't just favor her. They prioritized her at my expense. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the way they dismissed my feelings, like my hard work and stability somehow made me less deserving of their care. They didn't see me as someone who needed support. They saw me as a safety net, someone who could handle being cast aside because I'd figure it out. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, overanalyzing every word, every expression. The pain wasn't just about losing the inheritance. It was about realizing how little they seemed to value me. And in that moment, I made a decision. If they thought I didn't need them, then I wouldn't. After that gut-wrenching conversation with my parents, I realized one thing. I couldn't count on them for anything. If they could make such a monumental decision, handing over my inheritance to Rachel, without even consulting me, what else were they capable of? I had to stop relying on the idea of family as a safety net. If I was going to build something meaningful, it would have to be entirely on my own. At first, the bitterness fueled me. Every time I felt tempted to wallow in self-pity, I thought about how little they seemed to value my hard work and dedication. It became a kind of twisted motivation. I threw myself into my career, working longer hours and taking on extra responsibilities. I made a point of saying yes to opportunities one might have hesitated on before, promotions, side gigs, even relocating to a new city. Within a couple of years, I'd managed to save enough for a down payment on a modest home. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was mine. I remember standing in the empty living room the day I got the keys, running my hand along the wall, and thinking every bit of this is because of me. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that I didn't need anyone else to succeed. Meanwhile, Rachel was living like she'd hit the jackpot. My parents had given her the entire inheritance under the guise of helping her get back on her feet, but instead of being responsible with it, she treated it like a blank check. The first thing she did was buy a brand new luxury car, something way out of her budget, even with the inheritance. Then came the expensive vacations. Bali, Paris, Dubai, you name it, she posted about it. Her social media became a highlight reel of extravagance, with captions like treating myself because I deserve it and grateful for the blessings in my life. It was like watching a lottery winner burn through their winnings without a second thought. I wanted to feel smug, to laugh at how predictable it all was, but mostly I felt frustrated. That money could have been a safety net for me, a foundation to build on. Instead, it was funding Rachel's impulsive lifestyle. The worst part was how my parents enabled her behavior. Every time Rachel made a questionable purchase or ran into financial trouble, they swooped in to defend her. She's been through so much, my mom would say whenever I tried to point out Rachel's irresponsibility. She's finally enjoying life for a change. Can't you just be happy for her? It was infuriating. Rachel wasn't enjoying life. She was sabotaging her future. And my parents were standing by, cheering her on as she dug herself deeper into financial instability. I stopped bringing it up after a while. It was clear they didn't want to hear it. To them, Rachel was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was the one who was too harsh, too critical, too independent to need anything. So I stayed focused on my own path. I built a life that was mine, free from their meddling or expectations. I learned to take pride in my accomplishments, knowing that every success was a result of my own hard work. But even as I moved forward, the resentment lingered. Watching Rachel squander what should have been my inheritance was a constant reminder of how little my parents seemed to value me. And as much as I tried to let it go, I couldn't shake the feeling that one day their choices would come back to haunt them, and I wasn't sure I'd be there to pick up the pieces. It had been a few years since the inheritance debacle, and I had done my best to create some emotional distance from my parents. We still spoke occasionally. Birthdays, holidays, the usual, but the relationship felt hollow. They didn't acknowledge how deeply their decision had hurt me, and I didn't bring it up. It was easier to keep things surface level than to rehash old wounds. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. Seeing my mom's name on the screen was unexpected, but not alarming. I picked up, expecting some idle chit-chat about her garden or the neighbor's barking dog. But there was something different in her voice this time, an almost forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on edge. After the usual small talk, she hesitated for a moment before saying, "Your dad and I were wondering if you could help us out. Financially." Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. My parents, the same people who had spent years lecturing me about the importance of financial responsibility, were asking for help? "Wait," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Are you serious?" "Well," she said, dragging out the word like it might soften the blow. "We've hit a bit of a rough patch. Things are tight right now, and Rachel, well, you know how things are with her." "Ah, of course." Rachel, the golden child who had burned through her inheritance like it was monopoly money. The thought of bailing them out after everything that had happened made my stomach churn. "Let me get this straight," I said, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "You gave my inheritance to Rachel, every penny, and now you want me to bail you out?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "It's not like that," my mom said finally, her voice defensive. "We thought Rachel needed it more at the time, and we didn't expect things to get so complicated." I let out a bitter laugh. "Complicated? You mean you didn't think it through, and now you're realizing it was a mistake? Don't talk to your mother like that." My dad's voice cut in suddenly. I hadn't even realized he was on speakerphone. "We did what we thought was right for the family. Sometimes life doesn't go as planned." "No kidding," I muttered. They went on to explain how their savings had taken a hit after helping Rachel with her latest emergency. Apparently, she'd racked up even more debt and had turned to them for help again. In the process, they drained a significant chunk of their retirement fund. "We just need a little help to get back on track," my mom said, her tone almost pleading now. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. A part of me wanted to tell them exactly where they could shove their request, but another part of me felt that old, familiar tug of guilt. They were my parents, after all. Shouldn't I want to help them? But then I thought about the years I'd spent working my ass off to build a life for myself, while they funneled their support into Rachel's bad decisions. They hadn't cared about fairness or balance then, so why should I now? "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice steady but firm. "But I can't help you." "What do you mean you can't help us?" my dad snapped. "You're doing fine, aren't you? You just got that promotion. That's exactly the point, I interrupted. I worked for everything I have. You decided Rachel's needs were more important than mine, and I had to figure things out on my own. Now you're coming to me because she blew through everything you gave her? That's not my problem. My mom let out a soft gasp, and I could hear the hurt in her voice when she said, I can't believe you turned your back on us like this. No, Mom, I said. You turned your back on me the moment you decided my hard work meant I didn't deserve the same support as Rachel. I'm not your backup plan. The call ended awkwardly, with my dad muttering something about how family sticks together before hanging up. I sat there for a long time after, staring at my phone and trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling in my chest. Part of me felt guilty for saying no, but another part of me felt relieved. For once, I had stood my ground. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into cleaning up the mess they had created. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. My parents weren't the type to take no for an answer, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Saying no to my parents wasn't easy. After I hung up the phone that day, guilt began creeping in almost immediately. They were my parents, the people who'd raised me, who'd been there for the milestones in my life. Sure, they'd made mistakes, but wasn't I supposed to be the bigger person? The thought lingered, gnawing at me as I went about my day. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about a pattern, one that had started long before the inheritance debacle. Rachel had always been the golden child, the one my parents doted on and defended no matter what. Whether it was her grades in school, her questionable life choices, or her never-ending string of emergencies, she was always shielded from the consequences. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, never caused trouble, and learned early on that my achievements were expected, not celebrated. If Rachel needed help, I was the first person they turned to, whether it was to lend her money or help her move apartments for the third time in a year. I'd been playing the role of the reliable backup plan my whole life, and now, years later, they were still expecting me to clean up the mess. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was tired of being the one who always had to step up while Rachel was allowed to fall apart. And I was tired of my parents acting like that was my job. So for the first time in my life, I decided to set a firm boundary. The next time my mom called, 2 days later, as I expected, I braced myself. We've been thinking about what you said, she began, her tone laced with disappointment. And we just don't understand why you're being so cold about this. We're your parents, my name. Don't you think we deserve your help after everything we've done for you? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Mom, this isn't about being cold. It's about fairness. You made a choice when you gave everything to Rachel. You decided her needs were more important than mine. And now, you're expecting me to fix the fallout from that decision. That's not fair. It's not about fairness, she argued, her voice rising slightly. It's about family. Rachel's struggling, and we're struggling. We need you to step up. Step up? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. I've been stepping up my entire life. Every time Rachel had a problem, every time she needed something, I was the one you turned to. I'm done being the one who has to clean up after everyone else. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then she sighed heavily. I just don't understand where this is coming from, she said, her tone shifting to guilt-tripping mode. You've always been so responsible, so dependable. This isn't like you. That's exactly the problem, Mom, I said. You've always expected me to be the responsible one, to pick up the slack while Rachel got a free pass. It's not fair, and it's not right. I'm not doing it anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, she said, fine. If that's how you feel, I guess we'll have to figure something out on our own. After the call ended, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Standing up to my parents was new territory for me, and it felt both empowering and terrifying. For so long, I'd been conditioned to put their needs, and Rachel's, above my own. Breaking out of that cycle wasn't easy, but it felt like a necessary step. Of course, they didn't take it well. Over the next few weeks, I received a barrage of calls and texts from both of them, alternating between guilt trips and thinly veiled anger. My dad called me ungrateful, reminding me of all the sacrifices they'd made for me growing up. My mom kept trying to appeal to my sense of duty, saying things like, what kind of child abandons their parents in their time of need? But for every message I received, I held firm. I repeated the same message over and over. I can't help you. You need to figure this out without me. It wasn't just my parents who reacted poorly. Rachel got involved too. She called me one evening, her voice dripping with incredulity. Mom and Dad said you're refusing to help them, she said. What's your problem? Don't you care about family? Funny you should say that, I replied. Where was your concern for family when you took everything they had to give and spent it on luxury vacations and shopping sprees? That's not fair, she snapped. I needed that money. You don't know what it's like to struggle the way I have. No, Rachel, I said, my voice calm but firm. I don't. Because I've spent my life working hard to make sure I wouldn't end up in your position. Maybe it's time you did the same. She hung up on me, and I didn't hear from her again for weeks. Setting those boundaries wasn't easy, and there were moments when I second-guessed myself. But every time I thought about caving, I reminded myself of all the times I'd sacrificed for them, only to be treated like an afterthought. This wasn't just about money. It was about valuing myself enough to say no. For the first time, I wasn't letting them dictate my role in the family. And for the first time, I started to feel free. It didn't take long for Rachel to find out about my decision to say no to our parents. I wasn't surprised when my phone rang one evening, her name flashing on the screen like a warning. I knew this conversation was coming, but it didn't make it any easier to answer. Hey, I said cautiously, bracing myself for what I knew was about to happen. Rachel didn't waste any time. I can't believe what I just heard from Mom, she snapped, her voice already dripping with anger. She said you're refusing to help them. What is wrong with you? Don't you care about this family at all? I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Rachel, this isn't about me not caring. It's about fairness. I've spent years being the one who has to clean up after everyone else, and I'm not doing it anymore. Fairness? She practically shouted. Are you kidding me? Do you even know how much pressure I'm under right now? I'm drowning in debt. My name? And now Mom and Dad are struggling too. And you're just sitting there, doing nothing? Her words struck a nerve, but I refused to let her guilt me into submission. Rachel, let's get one thing straight, I said, my tone firm. You've already been given what was supposed to be my share of the inheritance. You took it, and you spent it. That was your choice. Don't turn around now and expect me to fix your mistakes. There was a brief silence on her end, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally gotten through to her. But then she snapped, that's not fair. I didn't have the advantages you had. You've always been the responsible one, the stable one. I needed that money to get back on my feet. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at her choice of words. Get back on your feet? I repeated. Rachel, you bought a brand new car, went on luxury vacations, and spent thousands on things you didn't need. That wasn't getting back on your feet. That was digging a deeper hole. That's easy for you to say, she shot back. You've never been in my position. You've never had a struggle like I have. No, Rachel, I said, my patience wearing thin. I've worked hard my entire life to make sure I wouldn't end up in your position. I've made sacrifices, lived within my means, and saved every chance I got. And now you're telling me I should feel guilty for not bailing you out? I don't think so. Her voice wavered then, a mix of anger and desperation. You don't understand how hard it's been for me, she said, softer now. I didn't ask to be in this situation, and I didn't ask to have my inheritance handed to you without a second thought, I countered. But here we are. The difference is I've taken responsibility for my life. Maybe it's time you did the same. That seemed to push her over the edge. You're unbelievable, she hissed. All you care about is money. You're selfish, and you're letting everyone down. Rachel, I said calmly, though my patience was running thin, this isn't about money. It's about priorities. And for once, I'm making myself the priority. You don't get to guilt me into cleaning up your mess just because you're overwhelmed. That's not my job anymore. She hung up on me after that, her parting words a muttered, you're the worst sibling ever. As the line went dead, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was angry. Angry that she still couldn't see the situation for what it was, that she continued to play the victim even when the truth was staring her in the face. But on the other hand, I felt a sense of relief. For years, I had been carrying the weight of my family's expectations, bending over backward to keep the peace and fix their problems. But now I was finally standing up for myself, and it felt good. Rachel's meltdown wasn't surprising, but it was a reminder of why I needed to set boundaries in the first place. My parents had enabled her behavior for years, and she had come to expect that someone, whether it was them or me, would always be there to pick up the pieces. But not anymore. I didn't hear from Rachel again for a while after that call. And honestly, I was okay with that. When word of my refusal spread through the family, it was as if a grenade had gone off. My parents wasted no time launching an all-out campaign to get me to change my mind. The phone calls began almost immediately, sometimes multiple times a day. My mom would start with guilt, reminding me of all they'd done for me growing up, while my dad would jump straight to anger, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. We're your parents, my dad barked one evening during one of his more heated rants. How can you just turn your back on us like this? After everything we've done for you, turn my back on you? I shot back, my voice shaking with frustration. You turned your back on me when you decided Rachel's needs were more important than mine. You made your choice, and I've been taking care of myself ever since. And now you want me to take care of you too? That's not how this works. The line went silent for a moment, and then I heard a sharp click as my dad hung up on me. It didn't stop there. The guilt trips escalated into full-blown emotional warfare. My mom started leaving long, rambling voicemails about how disappointed she was in me. I just don't understand how you can be so cold, she said in one particularly dramatic message. We're struggling. My name? We need you. Family is supposed to stick together. I deleted the message without replying. A few days later, my mom tried a softer approach, texting me a series of nostalgic photos from my childhood. One was of me and Rachel playing in the backyard, our faces smeared with popsicle juice. Another was a picture of the four of us on a family camping trip, all smiles and laughter. Remember these moments? She wrote beneath the photos. This is who we are. Don't let money come between us. Her attempt to tug at my heartstrings almost worked, but then I reminded myself that the version of our family in those photos wasn't real. Not anymore. The reality was that they had made their choice, and now they were reaping the consequences. Rachel predictably jumped on the bandwagon. She called me one evening, her tone a mix of righteous indignation and faux concern. Mom and Dad are so upset, she said, as if it were my fault. They don't deserve this. My name? You're tearing this family apart. Rachel, I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. Don't you dare put this on me. Mom and Dad are in this situation because of the choices you made and the choices they made. None of that is on me. Her voice rose. So what? You're just going to let them suffer? What kind of person does that to their own parents? The kind of person who's tired of being treated like a backup plan, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've spent my entire life cleaning up after you and making sacrifices for this family. I'm done. She sputtered, clearly caught off guard by my bluntness. You're unbelievable, she said finally, before hanging up. Even my extended family started to get involved. My aunt called me one afternoon, her voice full of forced cheer. You know, your parents are really having a tough time right now, she said, trying to sound casual. It would mean so much to them if you could step in and help. I appreciate the concern, I said, keeping my tone polite, but this is between me and my parents. Well, she said, her voice turning sharp, sometimes we have to put aside our pride for the sake of family. It's not pride, I replied. It's about boundaries. They made their choices, and I've made mine. The conversation ended awkwardly, with her muttering something about family loyalty before hanging up. Through it all, I clung to one truth. I wasn't wrong. For years, I had been the reliable one, the one who always sacrificed, always stepped up. My parents had taken that for granted, assuming I'd always be there to catch them when they fell. But I wasn't their safety net anymore, and it was time they learned to stand on their own. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of their disappointment and anger felt unbearable, moments when I questioned whether I was being too harsh. But then I'd remind myself of all the times I had been overlooked, all the times my needs had been deemed less important than Rachel's. This wasn't about being selfish. It was about finally valuing myself. The family gathering was supposed to be a celebration, some distant cousin's birthday or anniversary. I can't even remember which. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that it was the first time I'd been face-to-face with Rachel and my parents since I'd drawn my line in the sand. I almost didn't go. Every part of me wanted to avoid the inevitable drama, but a small, stubborn part of me refused to give them the satisfaction of thinking I was hiding. So I went, dressed my best, and armed with the resolve to keep my cool no matter what. At first, it wasn't so bad. The party was lively, the chatter light, and I managed to avoid Rachel and my parents for most of the evening. But of course, that couldn't last. By the time dessert was served, Rachel had found her way to me, cornering me in the kitchen while I refilled my drink. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she leaned against the counter. Look who decided to grace us with their presence. Must be nice, being so perfect and self-righteous. I sighed, setting my glass down. What do you want, Rachel? She folded her arms, a smug smile on her face. Oh, nothing. Just wondering how it feels to sit up there on your high horse, looking down on the rest of us. Must be a great view. I'd had enough. All the months of guilt tripping, all the phone calls and arguments, all the emotional manipulation. I could feel it bubbling to the surface, threatening to boil over. You know what's nice? I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. Not having to rely on other people to bail me out. Maybe you should try it sometime. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? She snapped. Just because you've got your little house and your little job and your little perfect life. You don't understand how hard it's been for me. Hard? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Rachel, you were handed a lifeline, more than most people ever get, and you squandered it. You didn't need me or mom or dad to save you. You needed to take responsibility for your own choices. But you've never done that, have you? The argument escalated from there, our voices growing louder and more heated with each exchange. Rachel accused me of being cold, selfish, and ungrateful. I fired back, pointing out all the times I'd stepped up for her and all the ways she'd taken that for granted. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was years of resentment boiling to the surface, years of being the responsible one while she got away with everything. At some point, my parents appeared, drawn to the noise. My mom looked horrified, clutching her pearls like we were a scene out of a soap opera. My dad, on the other hand, was furious. That's enough, both of you, he barked, his voice cutting through the tension. She started it, Rachel said, her tone suddenly petulant. Are you kidding me? I snapped, glaring at her. You came here looking for a fight, and now you're playing the victim? Classic Rachel. Stop it, my mom said, stepping between us. This is not the time or place. You're causing a scene. That was the breaking point. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. Of course. It's always my fault, isn't it? Rachel can do no wrong, and I'm the one who's causing a scene. You've been playing this game my whole life, and I'm done. Before they could respond, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. I could hear my mom calling after me, her voice pleading, but I didn't stop. As I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, frustration, sadness. But beneath it all was a sense of clarity. They were never going to change. Rachel would always be the golden child, and I would always be the one expected to pick up the pieces. No matter how many arguments we had, no matter how many times I tried to explain my side, they would never see things from my perspective. And if they couldn't understand, then I had to stop trying to make them. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet house, I made a decision. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about protecting myself. I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I was expected to sacrifice my own happiness and well-being for people who didn't value me. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. From that moment on, I decided to stop chasing their approval. I would keep my distance, focus on my own life, and let them deal with the fallout of their choices. They wanted me to be the villain in their story? Fine, but at least I would no longer be the scapegoat. The fallout from that family gathering was a turning point for me. I'd spent years trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as nothing more than a safety net, a dependable backup plan to clean up their messes. That day, something inside me snapped. I was done. The decision to go no contact wasn't immediate, but it became clear that I needed to step back. I started small, ignoring Rachel's passive-aggressive texts and letting my parents' calls go to voicemail. At first, it felt strange, almost wrong, like I was breaking some unspoken rule. For so long, I'd been the one to hold the family together, smoothing over conflicts and making sure everyone was okay. Letting go of that role felt like losing a part of myself. But as the days turned into weeks, something surprising happened. I began to feel lighter. Without the constant drama and expectations weighing me down, I found I had more energy to focus on my own life. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the burden of everyone else's problems. The silence, though liberating, was unsettling at first. My phone, once buzzing nonstop with calls and texts from my family, was eerily quiet. The absence of their voices, both the guilt-laden pleas and the accusatory tirades, was jarring. At times, I caught myself reaching for my phone, almost out of habit, to check for missed calls or messages. It was strange how deeply ingrained that sense of responsibility had become. But with each passing day, the urge faded, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I poured my energy into the things that mattered to me, my career, my friendships, and hobbies I'd neglected for far too long. I took up hiking, something I'd always wanted to try, but never seemed to have the time or mental space for. I started going to the gym more regularly, not just to stay in shape, but as a way to clear my head. And as I built this new version of my life, I realized something important. I wasn't selfish for prioritizing my own well-being. For years, I'd been told, implicitly and explicitly, that being a good sibling, a good daughter, meant sacrificing myself for the greater good of the family. But what good was that if it left me drained, resentful, and unfulfilled? My decision to go no contact didn't sit well with my parents, of course. They didn't take long to notice my absence and began ramping up their efforts to pull me back into the fold. The calls and texts came in waves. Some were dripping with guilt. "We're getting older. My name. We don't know how much time we have left." Others were angry, accusing me of abandoning the family. My dad sent a particularly scathing email, calling my actions cruel and saying I was punishing them for trying to help Rachel. Rachel, meanwhile, doubled down on her own narrative. She started posting vague status updates on social media about selfish people and how family should stick together. I ignored her. At first, their persistence made me second-guess myself. Was I being too harsh? Was it wrong to cut them off completely? But then I reminded myself of everything that had led to this point. The years of neglect, the blatant favoritism, the expectation that I would always clean up their messes. This wasn't about being cruel, it was about protecting myself. The more I distanced myself, the clearer it became that I'd made the right decision. Without the constant barrage of guilt and drama, I felt like I could finally breathe. My house became my sanctuary, a space free from the tension that had once consumed me. I started building deeper connections with the people who truly valued me. Friends who didn't see me as a resource or a fixer, but as someone worth knowing for who I was. These relationships, built on mutual respect and care, felt so different from the toxic dynamic I'd grown up with. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and sadness. But overall, the peace I gained was worth every awkward conversation, every guilt-ridden message I ignored. Going no contact wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my life and refusing to let myself be dragged down by people who didn't value me. And as hard as it was also the most liberating decision I'd ever made. The months after going no contact were transformative in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Without the constant drama weighing me down, it felt like a fog had lifted, revealing a version of my life I hadn't realized was possible. At work, my newfound clarity translated into focus and ambition. I took on challenging projects I might have shied away from before, confident in my ability to handle them without the emotional baggage my family had always piled on me. My efforts paid off when my boss pulled me aside one day to offer me a promotion. It wasn't just a title change. It came with a significant raise and new opportunities to lead. That success felt different. For the first time, I wasn't achieving something out of obligation or to prove my worth to anyone. I was doing it for me, and that made all the difference. Outside of work, I started exploring parts of myself I'd neglected for years. I booked my first solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but had never prioritized. I chose Italy, a country I'd dreamed of visiting since I was a kid. Wandering through the cobblestone streets of Florence, sipping espresso in a quaint piazza, and standing in awe beneath the Sistine Chapel ceiling felt like a reawakening. That trip sparked something in me, a desire to live fully and unapologetically. I started traveling more, checking off places on my bucket list with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. And then on one of those trips, I met someone. His name was Daniel, and we met while hiking in Banff National Park. What started as a friendly chat about the trail turned into hours of conversation about life, goals, and the things that truly mattered. Daniel was different from anyone I'd ever been with, steady, kind, and genuinely interested in knowing me. As we grew closer, he showed me what love and support were supposed to look like. With him, there was no pressure to prove myself, no unspoken expectations. It was a kind of partnership I hadn't realized I'd been missing, and it helped me see just how dysfunctional my family dynamic had been. Meanwhile, the echoes of my family's choices continued to ripple through the extended family grapevine. I didn't ask for updates, but mutual acquaintances and distant relatives seemed more than willing to fill me in on what was happening with Rachel and my parents. Rachel's financial troubles had worsened, as I'd expected. She had maxed out her credit cards again, and her car, a luxury vehicle she'd bought with the inheritance, was repossessed. She was now relying heavily on my parents to cover her rent and other expenses. My parents, in turn, were feeling the strain. Their retirement fund, once their pride and joy, had been severely depleted. I heard from a cousin that they were considering selling their house to keep up with Rachel's needs. It wasn't a surprise, but it was still sobering to hear. For so long, my parents had operated on the belief that Rachel's struggles were temporary, that if they just gave her one more boost, she'd turn things around. But that boost never came, it only enabled her to keep making poor decisions. The most striking thing about all of this, I didn't feel guilty anymore. There was a time when hearing about their struggles would have sent me spiraling, wondering if I should step in or if I was being a bad daughter for staying away. But now, I felt free. It wasn't my problem anymore. My parents had made their choices, and so had Rachel. I'd spent years trying to pick up the pieces, only to be treated like an afterthought in my own family. This time, I wasn't going to let their mess become my responsibility. Instead, I focused on the life I was building, a life where I wasn't defined by their chaos. I had my career, my travels, and a relationship that felt healthy and grounded. I was thriving in ways I hadn't thought possible, and it was all because I'd chosen to let go. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about creating space for myself to grow, away from the toxic patterns I'd been trapped in for so long. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly living. Looking back now, I can see the path I took with a clarity I didn't have when I was in the thick of it. Walking away from my parents and Rachel wasn't an easy decision. It hurt in ways I didn't expect, like an invisible wound that took time to heal. There were moments when I questioned myself, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I could have handled things differently. But every time I let myself dwell on those thoughts, I'd remember the weight I used to carry. The endless expectations, the unspoken assumption that I would always step up while Rachel was shielded from accountability. My parents made their choice when they gave her my inheritance. That moment defined their priorities, and it forced me to redefine mine. I chose to prioritize myself, to stop sacrificing my happiness for people who couldn't see my worth. And while it wasn't a happy chapter in my story, it was necessary. Life after cutting ties wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I built a life where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next crisis to drop in my lap. My career thrived. My relationship with Daniel deepened, and I found joy in small, unexpected moments, like hiking to the top of a mountain at sunrise or laughing with friends over a meal. I learned to celebrate my achievements without seeking validation from my parents or Rachel. The promotion I earned, the trips I took, the goals I hit, they were mine, and I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel proud of them. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about my family through mutual acquaintances. Rachel's financial situation continued to spiral, and my parents' resources were stretched thin trying to support her. They'd sold their house and moved into a smaller place to make ends meet, though it still wasn't enough. It was hard to hear, but I didn't let it consume me. I felt empathy for their struggles, but I knew it wasn't my responsibility to fix them. I'd spent too long trying to solve their problems, only to realize that some people aren't ready to be helped, at least not in the way they need to be. Letting go of the people who hurt you doesn't mean you stop caring about them. I'll always love my parents, and I'll always wish the best for Rachel. But love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself endlessly. Sometimes, love means setting boundaries and walking away so you can finally breathe. I don't know if my family ever truly understood my decision. Maybe they see me as the villain in their story, the one who abandoned them when they needed me most. But that's not my burden to carry. I've made peace with the fact that I might never get the closure or understanding I once craved. Instead, I've focused on building a life that feels whole, even without them. I've learned that moving on isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about learning from it, growing from it, and refusing to let it define you. That chapter of my life taught me an invaluable lesson. You can't always control how people treat you, but you can control how you respond. Choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. Now my life is my own. The weight of their expectations is no longer mine to bear, and the freedom that comes with that is something I wouldn't trade for anything. It's not a fairy tale ending. There's no reconciliation, no grand moment of understanding where everything is tied up neatly. But that's okay. Life isn't about perfection. It's about finding peace in the messiness, about knowing when to let go so you can make room for something better. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I've found that peace.